30 feet under the streets of Lower Manhattan, there's a cemetery the city tried to forget for 200 years. 15 to 20,000 people are buried down there. Men, women, children, free and enslaved Africans. They were buried between the 1690s and 1794 in a low patch of ground just outside the walls of colonial New York. By the time scientists tested this site's DNA, there were no bodies left to test. Every skeleton pulled from the ground had already been reburied years earlier, sealed back in the earth for good. So how do you pull 300-year-old human DNA out of a grave with no bodies left in it? And it's not even the strangest part of this story. Historians already had a map of who these people were. Old ship records said exactly where captives came from: West Africa, Central Africa, a few coastal regions, and nothing else. When scientists finally got real DNA results from this site, most of it matched that map. Most of it, but not all of it. One piece of what came out of that ground doesn't belong there, not according to any record anyone has ever found. Before we get into how you pull DNA from a grave with no bodies in it, hit subscribe. This channel digs into DNA mysteries hidden in real history. Every fact here comes from peer-reviewed science, meaning other scientists checked the work before it got published. No guessing. You'll want to see where this one goes. Historians had a clear model for these people, built on real shipping records. Between 1501 and 1867, ships carried captured Africans across the Atlantic Ocean. Researchers built a huge database tracking those voyages, port by port. Almost half of everyone taken, about 46%, came from West Central Africa, the coasts of the Congo and Angola. Another 16% came from the Bight of Benin, an area covering parts of modern Togo, Benin, and western Nigeria. About 12% came from the Bight of Biafra, near eastern Nigeria. The rest came from smaller regions: the Gold Coast, which is modern-day Ghana; Senegambia, the area covering today's Senegal and Gambia; Sierra Leone, and a few others. Add it all up. The records say over 90% of enslaved people brought to North America came from West and West Central Africa. That's not a guess. That comes straight from ship-by-ship records. Colonial New York fit this pattern closely. The city started out as New Amsterdam in 1626, run by Dutch traders. Dutch ships brought enslaved people mainly through West Central Africa, with a stop at the Caribbean island of Curaçao. In 1664, the British took over New York. After that, more ships arrived from the Gold Coast, from eastern Nigeria, and from British-run islands like Barbados and Jamaica. By 1740, 1 out of every 5 people in New York City was an enslaved African. That's the highest number anywhere in the northern colonies. The same pattern showed up on other Dutch-run islands too. On the island of St. Martin, at a site called Zoutsteeg, scientists tested teeth and found the same story: people born in Africa with family ties back to Cameroon and Nigeria. On the island of St. Eustatius, at a fort called Fort Amsterdam, similar testing separated people born in Africa from people born locally on the island. Every site pointed the same direction: West and Central Africa, backed by hard evidence. Modern DNA testing backs this up as well. Scientists studied the DNA of living African Americans today. Most of their maternal DNA, meaning the DNA passed down only from mother to child, traces straight back to West and Central Africa. Researchers confirmed this again and again in studies published between 2016 and 2023. So the model was solid, from 3 different directions at once: old ship records, colonial history, and modern DNA testing. West and Central Africa overwhelmingly. Nobody expected any surprises. Then came October 1991. Workers were digging the foundation for a new federal office building at 290 Broadway in a part of Manhattan called Foley Square. Backhoes hit something hard: wooden coffins buried 9 to 25 feet under the modern street. Before anyone realized what they'd found, heavy machines had already torn into the top layers of a forgotten graveyard. It covered 6.5 acres of ground. Word spread fast through New York's black community. Peggy King Jord worked in the mayor's office. She walked the dig site with local activists. She saw skulls and bones sticking out of the mud while construction kept going right next to them. Ministers, scholars, and everyday residents started showing up every day. They held vigils around the site. They demanded the government stop digging. It worked, but not without a fight. The agency running the project, the General Services Administration, wanted to keep building. It was a $276 million office complex, and they didn't want to lose time. Community members said this was sacred ground, and rushing to dig it up was wrong. A congressman named Gus Savage took up the fight in Washington. In 1992, Congress passed a law. It stopped construction on part of the building and paid for real scientific study. Control of the research moved from the government to Howard University, a historically black university in Washington, D.C. The scientist in charge was Dr. Michael Blakey. He called his approach client-oriented bioarchaeology. Bioarchaeology just means studying old bones and burial sites to learn about the people who lived and died there. The client-oriented part meant something bigger. For the first time, the black community whose ancestors were buried here had real control over how the research was done. Blakey put it simply, we were not studying objects. We were studying ancestors of a real, living descendant community that had been systematically stripped of its history. Our job at Howard was to let the skeletons speak their own truth about their lives, their origin, and their resistance. For 12 years, Howard's team studied the 419 bodies they had dug up. They tested tooth enamel, the hard, shiny outer layer of a tooth, using something called strontium. Strontium is a chemical that gets locked into that enamel when you're a child. It's based on the soil and water you grew up drinking. Africa south of the Sahara Desert leaves a different strontium signature than Manhattan's own ground does. Test after test found that African signature in adult after adult. That proved these people were born in Africa and only reached New York later as adults. The bones themselves told a hard story too. Many skeletons showed worn, damaged spots where muscles had pulled hard on bone over and over for years. Some had broken neck bones, likely from carrying heavy loads balanced on top of the head. Some of that same damage showed up in children as young as 9 or 12 years old. And using the skeletons, researchers worked out that more than half of everyone buried here died before becoming an adult. But even facing all of that, people held on to who they were. Many adults had teeth that were filed down or chipped into points on purpose, done before they ever left Africa. It's a cultural practice, a rite of passage, carried out across many parts of Africa south of the Sahara Desert. Grave sites also held small blue-green glass beads, seashells called cowries, copper rings and pins buried close to the body as spiritual gifts. Then, in October 2003, all 419 bodies were reburied for good. Each one went into a coffin hand-carved in Ghana, decorated with a symbol called Sankofa. Sankofa means looking back to learn from the past. The reburial followed a 6-city procession from Washington, D.C. all the way to Manhattan. In 2006, the site became a U.S. national monument. A granite memorial was dedicated there the next year. Which brings us back to where this story started. Those bones weren't coming back. So the mystery from the very start of this video is still sitting there, unanswered. How do you get new DNA proof from ancestors who don't have a single bone left anywhere to test? Dr. Fatima Jackson, a biologist at Howard University, had an idea. So did her student, Dr. Carter Clinton. When a body decomposes in soil for centuries, tiny bits of it leach straight into the dirt around it. If the skeletons were gone, maybe the dirt itself still held a genetic trace. Back in 1991, scientists had already collected soil samples from inside each skull, chest, and hip area during the dig. That soil had been sitting in sealed bags, locked in steel cabinets at Howard University ever since. Jackson and Clinton decided to test it. First, they needed to rule out contamination. So they collected soil samples from 3 nearby Manhattan parks, well away from any graves to use as a comparison. Then, they ran a DNA test on 81 soil samples from the burial site. They were looking for a signal the park soil simply couldn't have. The results were clear. The burial soil held far more bacteria than the park soil did. Specifically, it held bacteria types normally found in a human gut. Ordinary park soil had none of that. Regular dirt doesn't carry gut bacteria. A human body does. And mixed in with that bacteria was real, confirmed 300-year-old human DNA, pulled straight from the ground with no bones involved at all. That solved the mystery. No bodies were needed at all. The soil had been holding on to the evidence the whole time. And the very first DNA results matched exactly what everyone expected, only sharper than ever before. Most of the maternal DNA, the DNA passed down only from mother to child, traced right back to West and Central Africa. Just like the ship records predicted, one specific DNA branch matched people from the Gold Coast in modern Ghana. Another matched a group called the Mandinka from a region called Senegambia. This should have been the end of the story. It wasn't. Mixed into that same batch of expected results, Jackson's team found something else. DNA that traced to places nowhere near any documented shipping route into colonial New York. Real, confirmed DNA pulled from across the entire African continent. Dr. Jackson said it plainly, in her own words. We are finding that the maternal lineages of African Americans come from all over Africa. From East Africa, from West Africa, from Central Africa, the majority for sure from West and Central Africa, but also from Southern Africa, from Eastern Africa, and from North Africa. Some of that DNA traced to a group in Southern Africa called the Khoisan. That's thousands of miles from any documented shipping route into New York. Other DNA traced to East Africa and the Horn of Africa, the pointed region near modern Somalia and Ethiopia. Still more traced to North Africa. None of that lines up with the shipping records, which predicted over 90% of people came from West and Central Africa. So researchers point to 3 possible explanations. Ships may have taken longer, hidden routes around the southern tip of Africa. Overland trade routes, long before any ship got involved, could have moved people from North Africa into West African coastal towns. Or these family lines were already spread out across the whole continent, thousands of years before the slave trade even started. None of the 3 explanations fully accounts for a Southern African family line showing up on a New York shipping route at all. And it gets stranger the closer scientists looked. When Jackson's team dug even deeper into the same soil samples, they found something else. The surprising DNA wasn't spread out evenly across the whole site. It clustered. Certain burial areas matched almost exactly to specific small communities back in Africa. Matches more precise than any commercial DNA test today could manage. That kind of matching is remarkable, but it makes sense once you think it through. Maternal DNA passes from mother to child, mostly unchanged, generation after generation. So tight clustering just means specific families stayed close, genetically, for centuries. That's not simple, but it is explainable. It means the soil under Broadway holds a level of family detail that no written record from that time ever captured. But underneath even that layer, there's something scientists can't explain yet. Ancient DNA breaks down over time, especially in acidic soil like Manhattan's. Some of the DNA fragments researchers pulled out were just too damaged, too incomplete. They couldn't be matched to West Africa. The surprising southern, eastern, and North African signals didn't fit either. Nothing currently sitting in any DNA database on Earth fit them at all. Scientists haven't solved this one. Some of the genetic material buried under Broadway belongs to family lines nobody has identified yet. It may never get identified because the evidence keeps breaking down faster than anyone can test it. This matters right now, not someday. The water table under Manhattan rises and falls with the seasons, cracking DNA strands even further. Bacteria in the soil eat away at whatever organic material is left. Out of an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 people buried at this site, only 419 were ever dug up and studied directly. That's about 2%. Of that small group, scientists have tested somewhere between 81 and 92 soil samples. That's less than half of 1% of the site's total. More than 97% of the people buried under Lower Manhattan have never been tested at all. This is an unread library sitting under a modern American city. Less than 1% of its shelves have ever been opened. Every sample that breaks down past the point of reading is a family line that closes forever. There's no way to reopen it. Right now, researchers can trace specific families to exact coastal regions and flag anomalies nobody expected. But for every answer like that, there's a soil sample sitting in a cabinet somewhere. It might simply run out of time before anyone gets to test it. If this story matters to you, hit like and share it. That's what keeps this kind of research funded and keeps the window open a little longer. This isn't only ancient history either. Plenty of African Americans today take DNA tests, the Ancestry DNA or 23andMe kind. Some see small, unexplained percentages tied to East Africa, North Africa, or Southern Africa in their results. Companies often treat those numbers as background noise, not worth explaining. Remember the piece that didn't fit at the start of this video? This is that same piece, still showing up 300 years later in living people's DNA results. And remember, none of Jackson's DNA evidence would even exist without the fight the community won back in the 1990s. That fight is the reason any of this soil got preserved long enough for her team to test it decades later. So go back to where we started. One population's DNA didn't fit the model. That DNA came from a grave with no bodies left in it at all. Put those two facts together, and the Atlantic slave trade stops looking like a handful of tidy shipping lanes between two continents. It reached across the entire African continent, from the Atlantic coast all the way to the Indian Ocean, from the edge of the Sahara Desert down to the southern tip of Africa. New York's shipping papers only captured part of that story. The people buried under Broadway weren't just numbers on a shipping list. Their DNA passed from mother to child for 3 centuries. It survived a deliberate attempt to erase their names, their languages, and where they came from. Shipping papers reduced people to cargo counts and labels. The soil kept something no paper record ever could, preserved because nobody even knew it needed protecting. Destroying it on purpose would have meant destroying the ground itself. That's the real weight of one doesn't fit. It's proof that the people forced into that ravine outside colonial New York carried more history in their blood, more than any shipping record ever wrote down. And that history is still being read today. Out of a grave nobody thought still had anything left to say. New York isn't the only American city with a story like this hiding underground. Manhattan's discovery is part of a growing group of studies looking into African burial grounds all across the Americas. Each study tests the same question against a different city's shipping records. Down in Charleston, South Carolina, scientists tested ancient DNA from another colonial-era burial ground. Most of it matched the same West and West Central African pattern historians expected, but at least one person's DNA carried something else entirely. A documented link to a group called the Fulani. Plus, rare Native American maternal DNA that nobody predicted going in. That's a different city, a different population, and a completely separate mystery. Two burial grounds, hundreds of miles apart, both hiding a story their shipping records never told. We're covering it next. Subscribe now so you don't miss it.